Assuring the assurers why governance and accreditation matter in sustainability reporting. Today's sustainability disclosures are increasingly being relied by investors, regulators, and the board, but assurance behind those disclosures is not always subject to the same level of governance. As sustainability and climate reporting expands under regulations like CSRD, California's SB 261 and SB 253, and other global climate disclosure requirements, organizations are turning to third-party assurance to build credibility and trust. But while the demand for sustainability assurance is growing rapidly, the oversight of assurance providers themselves is uneven. In regular public financial reporting, we're familiar with the strong guardrails, which are mandatory licensing, inspection regimes, enforcement bodies that ensure the quality of the audit. And for non-financial assurance, those guardrails are still evolving. This session, Assuring the Assurers, is about closing that and understanding the gaps. Today, our purpose is to build transparency around how assurance providers are governed, what standards they follow, where accountability mechanisms exist or don't. We'll explore who is providing assurance over non-financial disclosure today, how different providers types are governed and overseen, why voluntary accreditation and independence oversight matter, how organizations can reduce vendor and credibility risk when selecting an assurance provider. And at its core, this webinar is really about trust. Trust in sustainability data, trust in assurance conclusions, and trust in the systems that support both, because truly assuring sustainability reporting, we also need to assure the assurance process itself. Our speakers today include myself, and I'm joined by Victor Avdolov, who brings deep expertise in data analytics and assurance enablement, and also by our very own Melanie O'Brien from Accountability, who shares perspective on AA1000 standards, practitioner oversight, and why governance of assurance providers matter in today's reporting landscape. I am Anisa Chaudhry. I'm the founder of Assure, an independent sustainability and assurance advisory firm. I'm a CPA CA with over 15 years of experience in audit, risk management, and assurance across the Big Four and Fortune 500 organizations. Over the last couple of years, my work has focused on designing and leading sustainability non-financial assurance engagement aligned with global regulations and leading reporting assurance frameworks. I will hand it over to Victor and Melanie for a quick intro.
Hi, my name is Victor. I have been working for Fortune 500 companies for the past 10 years. I have a master's in data science. I've been helping organizations like Deloitte, General Dynamics, and Accenture to stand up their data governance practices, their data assurance practices as well. Over to Melanie.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks, Anisa. Hello, everyone. My name's Melanie O'Brien. I'm the head of standards here at Accreditation. I can see many of our providers and partners on the line, so thank you so much for joining wherever you are in the world. I am responsible for maintaining the AA1000 series of standards, and part of that responsibility is ensuring that we respond to a lot of the regulatory requirements and conversations, as Anisa alluded to, that are happening in every part of the world, and making sure that our assurance standard not only responds to those regulatory requirements, but also develops the development, the necessary capabilities of the auditors who are undertaking a lot of this assurance. So partly this session was born out of a lot of requests from you about what are the differences in the regulations and the standards that are being used to respond to those regulations. So I'm very pleased to be able to put on this session for you all, and then hopefully at the end say a lot of things that you already know, but just showing how the AA1000 can support you in your work. So pleased to throw back to Anisa to let the session begin. But please add your questions throughout the session. I'll be reviewing the chat, and we have a little bit of time at the end to answer any questions that you may have for us.
Thank you, Victor and Melanie, for the introductions. So today together we'll explore how assurance is performed, how assurance providers are governed, and what organizations should be looking for when selecting an assurance partner. So this slide summarizes the main types of assurance providers in non-financial reporting ecosystem, and more importantly, how differently they're governed. So let's start with the chartered accountant professionals and statutory auditors. CPAs operate in a mandatory oversight environment. They must be licensed and are subject to regulatory inspection and are governed by professional and statutory bodies such as the AICPA in the US, CPA in Canada, and various audit regulators across Europe, Australia, and the APAC regions. So when CPAs provide assurance over non-financial information, they typically apply IACE 3000 or ISSA 5000. That oversight is not optional, it is enforced through regulation. Next is GHG and climate verifiers. This is actually the most tightly governed in the area of non-financial assurance. Verifiers must formally be accredited by international accreditation bodies such as ANAB or the IAF, and they perform work under ISO 1464-3. Without accreditation, the verification is not recognized, which is why GHG assurance is relatively consistent and widely accepted by regulators. Now, we compared that to internal audit functions that are governed by the Institute of Internal Auditors that follow the IIA Global Internal Audit Standards. However, this governance is actually voluntary rather than regulatory. The internal auditors provide assurance to management and boards, not independent opinions for external stakeholders. And finally, we have the independent assurance providers. These are firms that operate to perform sustainability or ESG assurance using the AA1000 standard, the ISAE 3000, or the ISSA 5000. Now, the key distinction here is that oversight and accreditation are voluntary unless required by regulation or a client. So AA1000 performs and provides licensing, practitioner certification, and accountability mechanism, but participation is not yet legally mandated. So the key takeaway from this slide is simple but critical, where CPAs and GHG verifiers operate in a very mandatory oversight regime versus internal auditors and independent assurance providers operate in a voluntary governance framework unless an additional accreditation is chosen. And that difference in oversight directly affects accountability, enforcement, and trust in non-financial assurance. Now, building on the previous slide, once we understand how differently assurance providers are governed, the next question is, why is it that risks that create for organizations that are relying on assurance, right? What are the risks? The first, we want to talk about quality risk. When assurance standards are not enforced through inspection or accreditation, there's no mechanism to ensure that the work performed has sufficient rigor. That can result in limited testing, weak audit trails, or conclusions that may appear to be compliant but cannot withstand regulatory scrutiny. The second is independent risk. Many independent assurance practitioners also provide consulting services to the same clients without enforced independence rules. This creates self-review threats, where same firm helps in design disclosures and then assures them as well. Unlike CPAs, these independent requirements are often voluntary but not regulatory enforced. The third risk is a regulatory risk. So under regulations like CSRD in the EU or the new California regulations SB 261-253, regulators are increasingly clear that assurance must be performed by appropriately qualified and in some cases accredited providers. Using an assurance provided without recognized oversight can result in assurance that does not meet legal requirements and exposing companies to fines, reinstatements, or even rejected filings. The fourth we can talk about is reputational and litigation risk. Now, investors are increasingly expected to have sustainability assurance to be more audit-like. Now, if ESG disclosures are later challenged due to misstatements, emission errors, or more importantly, greenwashing, the credibility damage falls squarely on the company, especially when assurance providers lack enforceable accountability. So the issue isn't whether assurance is obtained, it's whether the assurance is defensible, enforceable, and can be trusted. Now, if you look at what actually happens when assurance fails, if you look in the financial audit world, consequences are very clear and severe. When auditors fail to comply standards, enforcement is direct, public, and personal. Recent PCAOB action shows how CPA firms and individual partners and managers can face sanctions, penalties, and reputational damage for inadequate testing or documentation of financial audits. In contrast, with non-financial and ESG assurance, sustainability disclosures are challenged. Enforcement has historically focused on the company. I think, can somebody please go on mute, if you don't mind? We're hearing a lot of background noise. Thank you for that. So in contrast, we're looking at non-financial and ESG assurance, where sustainability disclosures are challenged. Enforcement has historically focused on the company, but not the assurance provider. A recent example of Total Energy's greenwashing rule, where companies face legal consequences for misleading net zero claims. While there were no indication that any assurance was provided on these climate targets, but had there been assurance, the independent assurance provider would run the risk of legal and reputational damage. So therefore, we can see the clear asymmetry in the consequences of not having oversight, right? So in the financial reporting, we're seeing oversight is mandatory, providers are licensed, and enforcement is direct and personal. In non-financial assurance, oversight is often voluntary, accreditation may be optional, and when failure occurs, it's really the company that bears the risks. So this gap creates a real vendor risk for organizations. Without enforced standards, assurance can really become like a checkbox rather than a credible risk management control. And that's why assuring the assurers matter, because trust in sustainability reporting depends on the trust in the assurance behind it. Now, to understand how assurance becomes credible or fails, we need to look at the assurance life cycle itself. This slide shows the end-to-end life cycle that is common across leading standards, including the AA1000, ISAE 3000, and ISSA 5000. It's important because assurance isn't just quality isn't determined at just one point. It's a result of controls working together across the entire engagement. It starts with governance. If the provider doesn't have proper ethics, independence, competences, and resourcing in place, the engagement is compromised before it even begins. Next is documentation. This is how assurance is actually made defensible through sufficient appropriate evidence and clear audit trail that supports conclusion. Undocumented work is treated as no work done at all. The third stage is data and IT controls. So as we see sustainable assurance becoming more data-driven, firms must protect client data controls and manage retention and disposal. With weak data controls, this introduces both credibility and vendor risk exposure. Then we come to reporting. This is where all prior work is translated into clear, standards compliant, and assurance conclusion with transparent scope, methodology, and any limitations that would have incurred during the assurance process. And then finally, the most important is oversight and accountability. This is really what differentiates credible assurance from a one-off opinion. Oversight through mechanisms like quality assurance reviews and external accountability ensures consistency, learning, and enforcement over time. So the key message here is assurance is just not a report. It's actually like a life cycle. And in any part of the life cycle is weak or unenforced, trust in the assurance process actually breaks down. Now, if we've looked at the assurance life cycle, let's get started with the foundation, which is governance. This slide shows that governance standards are common across AA1000, ISAE 3000, and ISSA 5000. What's important here is that governance is actually not best practice. It's a prerequisite for any credible assurance. First is firm governance, ethics, and independence. Across all three standards, these are mandatory. And if you look at like the legends over here, The green check mark says it's mandatory, and then the blue arrow means it's not always prescriptive, but failure to implement materially weakens the defensibility of your assurance process. So in this instance, if a provider doesn't have formal independent safeguards and ethical requirements, the quality management in this place, the assurance cannot be considered credible. And the risk is unmanaged conflicts of interest, particularly where the same firm comes from both consulting and assurance practice. They have no clear escalation path for ethical issues. In practice, what this means is you must have a documented governance charter, an independence conflict of interest policies, proper ethics code, and a quality management system. If we move on to the next one, this is the engagement, acceptance, and continuance process. This includes scope, criteria, and materiality definition. Again, this is mandatory across all three standards, and if the scope and criteria are not clearly defined up front, there is actually a real risk that the work performed deviates from what was agreed, or the assurance applied to unsuitable or unclear criteria. Practically, this actually requires documented accepted checklists, formal engagement approvals, and written justifications of your scope, your criteria, and your materiality decisions. Third is the practitioner competence and professional development. This is also mandatory across all three standards. And this is where assurance conclusions are only as strong as the competence of the people performing the work. Without appropriate expertise and ongoing training, practitioners may miss material issues or rely too heavily on management representations. So in practice, this means having a formal competency requirement, relevant certification, minimum CPD hours, and most importantly, ethics training tied to assurance responsibilities. So the key takeaway from this slide is that governance controls are not optional. When these governance requirements are missing or treated as informal, the impact is not technical non-compliance. It's actually a loss of credibility, regulatory exposure, and reduced trust in the assurance conclusion. And that's why governance sits in the very start of the assurance lifecycle. Now, building on governance, the next pillar of credible assurance is documentation. Across AA 1000, IACA 3000, and ISSA 5000, documentation is mandatory. So if the work is not documented, it is treated as work not performed, regardless of how much effort went into the engagement. So it's a bit of a loss if you don't document your work at all. The first area in here is planning and risk assessment documentation. All three standards require risks to be identified, assessed, and documented. If key risks such as climate assumptions or boundary decisions are not documented, material errors or unrealistic assumptions can go undetected. So in practice, this means having a risk-based planning procedure and documented rationale for how the procedures are going to be performed and the sampling methodology to respond to identified risks. The next is evidence gathering, testing, and documentation. This is also mandatory. Without sufficient, appropriate, reviewable evidence, assurance conclusions cannot be defended under, inspection or dispute. Practically, this requires defining what you're testing, what is your sampling approach, and completed work papers that can be clearly linked to evidence and procedures, and more importantly, the conclusion reached from performing the testing procedures. The third area is evaluation and professional judgments. So judgment must be documented, not just made. So if management assertions are accepted without documented challenge, assurance becomes conformatory rather than independent, and increasing greenwashing and enforcement risk. So in practice, firms need explicit documentation of judgment, assumptions, and evaluation of rationale. And finally, internal quality management, engagement review in mandatory or strongly expected, depending on the framework that you choose. So without documented review, errors reach public domain and credibility can be damaged. So practically what this means is documented engagement quality reviews by qualified reviewers before issuance must be done. So if somebody is performing the work, you must have somebody independent actually review and approve the work to make sure it's being done appropriately. And the key takeaway is documentation is, again, evidence that assurance actually occurred. Without it, assurance is not defensible no matter which standard is applied. So now I will actually pass it over to Victor to walk us through some of the data and IT controls.
Great, thanks, Anissa. Okay, so we've been talking about documentation and kind of what you need to have, how to structure it, how to make sure it holds up scrutiny. But I want to ask you something. Where does all that documentation live right now? Like physically, where is it? And who in your firm has access to it? And what happens 6 months after you close the engagement? Because I'll be honest with you, this is where I see a lot of firms fail or get in trouble, I should say. Not the technical assurance, the boring stuff, the IT stuff, the stuff that nobody wants to talk about until something goes wrong. And this is also called in industry data governance, right? So a lot of that has to do with the explosion of AI, the cognitive offload that a lot of our colleagues are using now. So let me paint you a picture. It's 9 p.m. An analyst is staring at a spreadsheet, 200 suppliers' emissions factors, conversion rates, spend data, and client needs the analysis in the morning. She's tired. She's thinking, you know what? Let me just offload this quickly, have ChatGPT flag the outliers. And just like that, your client's data is gone. It's in a public model. It's available to everyone. And it's forever. You can't bring it back. And nobody even knows it happened. Right. So 6 months later, the client internal audit pulls the thread. They find out. And here's the thing. You don't just lose trust in you. They lose trust in every independent assurance provider because your firm did it. Who else is doing it? Right. So the fix isn't really complicated. Written policy, enterprise AI tools only, client consent documented, train your people. You actually have to do it, not just assume everyone knows better. So let's move on to the data access problem, right? Data storage problem. Basically, when you have all the data and you're finished up with all of your engagements, right? It's done. Everyone moves on, and the work papers, they just sit there, or the workspaces, they just sit there. All the shared data is there. It's all in the shared drive for years. You have drafts of final versions, all kinds of calculations in there, and no one ever cleans it up. And 3 years later, your client gets hit with a greenwashing lawsuit, right? Lawyers subpoena all the documents, and they get those documents that should have been deleted that are misinterpreted, and now the client loses trust in you. So you have to handle that as well. You have to have defined retention periods. You have to secure, archive at close, destroy what you're supposed to destroy with certificates. And the next one is the change management, right? So change control problem that you might face. It's a bit sneaky though. So it doesn't feel like a risk when it's happening, but it is. Your senior manager receives work papers. Sharp person notices some emission factors look outdated, so she updates them, pulls in the latest EPA data, recalculates 15 lines. It's more accurate now. It's a better product, except she didn't document it. No note, no version history, no approval trail. The original data overwritten. Now a regulator shows up. They want to understand the work. They ask, which numbers did you actually assure? And you can't show them. Your final report says one thing, your source documentation says another, and you got no trail connecting them. And that's how assurance reports get thrown out. That's how firms lose accreditation. So version control, change logs, sign-offs. Every time data changes, you document it. You retest. It's not glamorous, but it's the difference between a defensible conclusion and liability. And sorry, I think I skipped around a little bit, but basically, at the end of the day, you can see that you have ISAE and ISSA give you the flexibility in how you implement it. And AA1000 is more prescriptive. And the thing that really matters is that every single touch point with clients' data is a control point. So one lapse at intake can cascade into regulatory action, litigation, reputational damage by the time the engagement closes. That's all I got. Back to you, Anissa.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So now once all the work is done and documented, reporting is where assurance either holds together or falls apart. Across all three standards, the reporting requirements are largely mandatory because the assurance report is what users usually rely on. So first is clarity of scope, criteria, and the level of assurance. All three standards require assurance reports to be clearly stating what was assured, under which criteria, and what level. If this isn't clear, users may misinterpret limited assurance as reasonable assurance, creating greenwashing or misleading disclosure risk. In practice, this means standardized reporting templates aligned to the engagement letter and the work actually being performed. The second is alignment of the report with the work performed and the evidence. So this is also mandatory. And if the report conclusions are not supported by the documented procedures and evidence, the assurance actually becomes non-defensible under inspection or dispute. Therefore, firms need mandatory cross-checks between what the report language is, what the work paper said and has been done, and the conclusions what the conclusions were before actual report issuance. Then the third is clear use of balanced and non-misleading language. Again, this is very mandatory because overly positive or promotional language increases scrutiny and enforcement or even reputational risk if disclosures are later challenged. So in practice, in your reporting, the words prescribed have to be explicit limitations and a balanced presentations of any findings or uncertainties too as well. So finally, the report authorization, review, and assurance controls are mandatory under AA1000 and ISAE 3000 and strongly expected under ISSA 5000. So without proper review and authorizations, errors could reach public domain and credibility can be damaged. So this means you have to have a defined approval workflow of having a proper engagement quality review and documented sign off prior to issuing the report. So the key takeaway is really simple. Reporting is just not formatting, it's actually a control, and weak reporting controls can undo even strong assurance work. Now, moving over to our last slide, and arguably this is the most important stage of the assurance lifecycle, which is oversight and accountability. So this slide highlights a critical difference across the assurance frameworks. So under AA1000, oversight is actually external and enforceable. Assurance providers operate under licensing, complaints handling, quality assurance review, and formal accountability mechanism. Oversight is independent of the firm delivering the work, which strengthens transparency, confidence in assurance outcomes. So now if you look at it in contrast, IAE 3000 and ISSA 5000 primarily rely on internal firm oversight or inspection readiness. So what this means is quality is monitored through firm's own quality management system, engagement review, and internal governance. So while these controls are important, they're actually self-managed unless an external regulator or an inspector intervenes. So if you look at the first area, it's the independent oversight framework. So when oversight relies only on self-review and the risk is loss of independence where firms are reviewing and approving their own work, right? The impact is reduced assurance credibility due to absence of any independent accountability. So in practice, what this means is it's a clearly defined oversight model separating engagement delivery, review, and having an escalation process and accountability. The next is engagement quality review prior to the report issuance. This is mandatory under AA 1000 and IEC 3000 and strongly expected under ISSA 5000. So without an independent pre-assurance review, errors may reach the public domain, leading to reissuance, regulatory scrutiny, and loss of confidence. So in practicality, this means having mandatory independent reviewer sign off before the reports are released to make sure errors are avoided. The third area is reviewer independence, competence, and authority. So across all frameworks, reviewers must be appropriately qualified, independent, and empowered with, challenging conclusions. So if reviewers lack sustainability experts or authority, material judgment issues may go unchallenged, increasing greenwashing and enforcement risks. And then finally, we look at review documentation, remediation, and continuous improvement. Without documented review outcomes and follow-up actions, firms cannot demonstrate effective quality management. So in practice, this means documented review notes, issue resolution tracking, root cause analysis, and updates to methodology and training. Overall, the key takeaway in this is internal oversight is necessary, but independent accountability oversight actually elevates the trust. And this is where AA 1000 plays a very distinct role in the assurance ecosystem. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Melanie, who will actually share her perspectives on the standards, what would be the requirements for practitioner oversight, and most importantly, why governance of assurance provider matters today in today's reporting landscape. So I'll hand it over to you, Melanie.
Thank you, Anissa. And I'll start sharing my screen just so we've got all the materials to hand. But as I'm doing that, I just wanted to share how Anissa and I actually started speaking about this topic, because we met last year and we're really exploring, like, what does the financial reporting has been around for so much longer than sustainability reporting and is mandatory. And so what can we borrow from the financial space that works very well into sustainability assurance? And as many of you know, accountability has been around this is our third decade. And so, obviously a lot of this is continuous improvement. How much can we expand on the controls that we want to put in place, and how can we get better? So we're not saying that we've got the secret sauce and that every single report is meeting the expected high quality bar that we would like, but it's a matter of building more of this framework in place and a process to assess a lot of these reports. So that's where, picking up on a lot of the pieces that Anissa and Victor have commented on, I wanted to just show you behind the curtain a little into what accountability are doing, and pick up on some of the points that, Michael, you've raised in the chat relating to how can we be better at making sure that the quality assurance is there. So I think most of you on the call are familiar with accountability, but just for those who may have popped in and haven't heard of us, as I said earlier, we do have the AA 1000 series of standards. Most of today's discussion is to talk about our assurance standard, which we do have that more a higher quality bar of reporting engagements to us. But we have been around for so long and have allowed that our standards are free to download. And with that comes some risks. If you allow your standards to be used by everyone, it's very much a trust-based system that those who are using our standards are reporting those to us. And the stakeholder engagement standard is probably one of the more popular standards because it's very much being used in a very subjective topic. Stakeholder engagement is very much dependent on the context in which you operate, in the culture in which you operate, and so we as of now, that's available to use and really be adopted by reporting organizations to hone their stakeholder engagement and commensurate it to the environment in which they operate. But as I said, speaking primarily about the assurance standard today, and both of these standards are based on the principles that appear on the right-hand side of this page, and very much in keeping with a lot of the regulatory requirements around sustainability is think internally, think what an organization needs from its sustainability journey, its sustainability objectives, making sure that it is responding to those material topics. And if you, follow double materiality, of course, thinking of your impact on the external community, environment, and economy. But if you're just doing financial materiality, of course, thinking about how does these sustainability topics affect the sustainability, the viability of your organization. So these standards are very much grounded by our principles, those 4 principles on this page. Just doubling down a little bit more about how does the AA 1000 differ from those standards. Of course, Anissa has already given such a comprehensive overview of all of the steps of the assurance process, but I did just really want to emphasize that it is this principles-based standard, and we're really trying to provide reporting organizations guidance on what is that the governance around sustainability, the sustainability strategy, and we're quite pleased with our standard as a way of supporting organizations looking into the future and trying to predict sustainability performance in advance rather than just a data verification standard. So in my conversations with regulators, the things that come up most are how does your standard actually help meet those goals and targets that have been set by reporting organizations? And is that in keeping with all of the activities, projects that the organization is doing, or do you have a very lofty goal and there's not the activity behind the scenes that's actually going to help with that? When you apply the 4 principles, you can really help test whether or not those activities are going to hit those loftier goals. And so, as I've mentioned, we do have a extensive partnership, a network of assurance providers globally that undertake assurance using this standard. And so we ourselves don't do the assurance. We really put our responsibility on making sure that the licensing of those assurance providers meets the expectation of the market. And so again, in conversations with regulators, the thing that I emphasize the most about our application process is we don't want to create a high barrier to entry that's going to limit a 1-2 person operation. We want to make sure that everyone who wants to do sustainability assurance, if they have the appropriate governance and controls of their organization, then they should be able to operate. There shouldn't be this high barrier to entry and having to, have significant quality management systems and all of these extensive procedures at the outset. That should be banked into every single engagement. And that's why we've developed a process where every engagement is submitted to us so that we can really audit those engagements as opposed to making sure that it's too hard for any organization in any region to become a member of ours or a licensed assurance provider. a little bit more on that. I've already spoken about the principles, and we're very proud of how that's really transpired in regulatory conversations. They're very much in agreement that these principles are the basis of a solid sustainability strategy. But I want to touch on some of the other points on this slide. I mentioned that we ask that every licensed assurance provider submit assurance engagements to us. We ask that they complete an agreement that specifies that if you're referring to our standard or our principles in the work in a commercial way with your clients, then we ask that you submit it to us so that we can monitor how these assurance engagements are taking place, the level of which the assurance is being completed, the sources, the reporting requirements or frameworks being used by those reporting organizations. And really, there's so many parts to this process. We ask that the pre-engagement is submitted to us because we want to know from the outset, what is your scope of work? What have you agreed to with this client? And do they know the differences between our assurance standard and perhaps another standard? So we ask that to be submitted well ahead of time so that we can give you the approval that everything looks okay. We review every single one of those to make sure that nothing looks at odds to, what's set out in the agreement with the client, that, as Anissa mentioned before, that there's no conflicts of interest. We look through all of those things, and we do defer to some of the information that you've reported to us in your application process, your website, your other qualifications in those engagements. And sometimes we'll reach back out to you and say, it's not necessarily meeting the quality bar that we expect. And then we'll ask you to resubmit it. We're here to work with you. We see that if everyone can improve their processes, it's going to be a better sustainability outcome for reporting organizations, the assurance network, as well as society, without being too cliche. So that's the first step. The second step is after the engagement, we ask that you submit the details of your findings of that assurance engagement and the adherence to the principles, detailing what you've found that reporting organization has done and the activities that they have in place, the processes they have in place to meet the four principles. And so that really helps conclude that the assurer is looking into that future performance and making recommendations in order for that reporting organization to see how do they continuously improve themselves and their processes to meet those sustainability outcomes. So that's a little bit about the quality assurance. Just to reiterate, lower barrier to entry, but higher onus on those individual engagements. And then in addition to all of those submissions that we review individually, we're also going back and looking at those data inputs at an aggregate level, and then also helping to improve the input. So reaching out to assurance providers where we think that they need to improve some of their commentary and perhaps the recommendations so that they are to the level that we expect. Just a side note, we are going to be publishing an updated guidance for assurance providers in hopefully the next month or two, which will have a few more examples of what we've seen in practice to help meet those higher quality bar for submission. Again, when we're working with you, we want to improve these processes. We know we can improve our processes, but the goal is that everyone improves the quality of these assurance engagements and the sustainability assurance statements that are being submitted. Just also want to talk about the dispute resolution. Whilst of course the network is important and we're growing every year, and we want to see more opportunities for greater collaboration and opportunities like this webinar, I want to focus on the dispute resolution because this has come up a little bit in our conversations with regulators and also commentary like our lower barrier to entry. As I said before, we have our standards available free to download and use. And we are a public benefit corporation and quite a small organization, as some of you might not know. And so we rely on our network to help us maintain this high quality bar. So if you see anything that you think is at odds, any behaviors by licensees or reporting organizations that don't meet the code of conduct that we have in our assurance standard or in our materials, please let us know. We have this dispute resolution whole process. It's available and documented on our website. I'm happy to provide the details to you all if you haven't seen those. So please just reach out to us. And really the intention of this is we want to use our network so that there aren't these inaccuracies or inconsistencies of users of the AA 1000 AS, and that together we're all improving and we're doing the right thing. And it could be a conflict of interest that you've seen. It could be that you don't think that the assurance statement meets the goal that our standard specifies. Whilst we hope to review all of those engagements submitted to us, we know that there's a lot that aren't submitted to us, and we have to chase either licensees or providers that have never sought the license. So we are only as good as the network, and we really rely on people reaching out to us if they see anything at odds to our expectations. So please use that mechanism and always reach out if you've got a question. I just wanted to double down on some of the points that Anissa and Victor had referred to, but we see this being the use of the AA 1000 as being significant value to the assurance provider, because we think that, as I've said already, there's very much a credibility of the principles as they align to sustainability goals, and having the ability to showcase that you have submitted your assurance engagement, you've received the logo, you've got that unique marking, that you can go back to the reporting organization and substantiate that this has been verified, assessed, and that they have confidence that the whole process has been followed. So really, I think sometimes this is lost when we talk about assurance, that there is no value to, between different standards to choose, but this can really show your credibility and your capability to your reporting organization. So again, I've had a lot of conversations with reporting organizations recently who didn't really know why they chose the ISAE 3000, or they may have just kind of walked into doing sustainability assurance. But it's my role to really help you all communicate the value of the AA 1000 to your reporting clients. And so we'll have more materials on this as we progress. But I did just want to say that there is that value for assurance providers as well as the reporting organization, which leads me to that value for the reporting organization. So again, I think it's my role to really increase the brand of the AA 1000 and showcase to sustainability leaders that you can get your sustainability data assured and help you plan the future sustainability strategy, not just kind of look at the data and go, okay, it all looks good, but this can help you build credibility with your investors, other stakeholders, as you showcase that you're on the path to meeting the goals, because you've really assessed your sustainability program and the data against those principles. I can share a little bit more about this, but I've just got an eye on the clock, and I know we want to spend some time on questions. But I also just really wanted to show to just reinforce that the reason why we have the our whole business is exclusively sustainability, and we see the value of sustainability experts delivering assurance. Again, in the conversations with regulators, they really respond to the fact that a lot of the license assurance providers of the AA1000 are actually sustainability experts and assurance second, rather than coming from just a financial background and doing a sustainability program, which nothing wrong with that, but I think the network and building from the understanding of what sustainability is, and knowing that you can't be a sustainability expert across all topics, but you might have a particular focus in environment or in the social elements of sustainability. So I think once we apply the principles, it's very easy to see that the AA1000 and the licensed assurance providers are assessing sustainability holistically, rather than falling into the trap of just kind of verifying one piece of data or so forth. So really just wanted to reiterate that and share that it's why we've invested in the Certified Sustainability Assurance Practitioner Program. We really want to build upon the existing expertise and knowledge that we know exists in our network, and create a formidable force out there that we know a lot of other parts of sustainability are lacking. Just briefly, I did just want to reiterate, this is valuable to reporting organizations. We did a study about 18 months ago now that looked at ESG rating scores, and we saw that the value of using the AA1000 assurance standard actually builds a lot more value for these organizations, and that's reflected by the ESG rating score. So users of the AA1000 versus other standards actually saw a higher ESG rating score across the board, and even just a difference of doing assurance, irregardless of what standard was used, returns a higher value for organizations. So the more we can say that you shouldn't just be doing assurance to meet some regulatory need, it's actually going to improve your sustainability program and also deliver a higher value for your stakeholders interpreting that information, as well as the ESG ratings companies having confidence in the data that you've prepared for them and in your sustainability report. Final slide. Sorry, Anissa, I knew I would take a little bit longer. I just wanted to showcase some of those mechanisms that we have to showcase to reporting organizations what is credible, what is the process that accountability has required. And so I think the most common question from a lot of assurance providers is, oh, why do we have to submit all the information? Can't you just take our word for it? And I of course, we do take your word for it. We know that you're doing great work out there, but the value for the reporting organization in getting this unique marking that, yes, it's been through the process, yes, it's been verified according to these expectations, is really useful. And I speak to sustainability teams frequently, and they say having that just gives a little bit more certainty that the provider has gone through all the steps. And a few other little nice to haves. The reporting organization, as soon as you submit the information on our website, you are then the reporting organization will feature on our reports page. So again, if someone is trying to verify whether or not the assurance statement is credible, you can go to our website and look to see if the reporting organization is featured. This past year, we've just mandated that every assurance engagement does have a certified sustainability assurance practitioner on each engagement, and a value, an extra little token is you also appear on our website, and that again, to help reporting source the appropriate person to join the assurance engagement. And then finally, well, similarly, the licensed assurance provider will also be displayed on our website if you remain active, so that reporting organizations or other stakeholders can find you as a legitimate AA1000 partner. So that's it from me. Sorry about running over, but please let me know if you've got any questions. Oh, I can see there was a lot of questions in the chat. Sorry, I couldn't see those whilst I was talking.
I was thinking, Melanie, maybe if somebody wanted a live question, that's fine, but we could address overall some of the chat questions too as well. In particular, I'll take this question over here in terms of like the requirement and the QAR process. So I really want to explain the differentiation between what is like a requirement to be audited as an independent assurance professional versus not, right? So you are correct. And well, like following the standards, it's voluntary unless it's a regulatory requirement, right? So an example would be in the new California climate risk reporting regulations. They kind of go over saying that, okay, what is the standards that is acceptable when assurance is provided. And so, and then you have other voluntary reporting, such as like, the GRI or the TCFD, which is voluntary reporting, but sometimes client might want assurance on that, right? So if it's a regulatory requirement, the regulators will actually tell you what the accepted standards are that they're willing to, accept the assurance on. And then if it's a voluntary reporting, the clients usually would be like, okay, it really doesn't matter whether it's AA1000, ICE 3000, or the ISSA 5000, because it's again voluntary reporting. So that's like the distinction I really want to make in terms of, hey, the request that, hey, the client themselves may not necessarily come and say that, oh, are you being monitored? So from like that perspective, I would say that yes, if it's voluntary reporting, the AA1000 is monitored for independent assurance professionals. And then, but if you're a CPA, you're already falling under the PCAOB standards requirement, and you're being monitored. So that's where I think like the difference in the QAR process is, whether it is going to happen or not. Go from there.
I've just read through some of the chat. I think I might have to take all of these offline, given I think they might be too lengthy to respond to in 3 minutes. But I might just pick up on the point of how much information is being submitted to accountability. At the outset, the pre-engagement form is just asking for your agreement between parties. So what we're looking for there is the scope of the engagement, and whether or not, and the information that is being reviewed. So, often an assurance provider will reach out to us and ask, is this a legitimate use of the AA1000? Like, can this be the assurance standard? Because it's so early on in the piece, the work hasn't started yet. And that's a good conversation starter, whether or not our assurance standard is usable for that context. And then after the engagement is completed, we're not asking you to submit anything that may be sensitive or things that wouldn't be in the public domain, but we're just looking for what you've put in your assurance statement, the details of your recommendations and findings. If it is a a private relationship and it's not a listed company and the assurance statement isn't public information, then the information that you submit to us is protected. We're not using it. We're just verifying it. So when I say your information is on the website, it's just the organization name and the date of the assurance that was undertaken. It's not the recommendations or the contents of the assurance statement. Just wanted to clarify that point. And really what we're doing that test of is just, again, to make sure that the assurance standard has been used in a credible way, and that you aren't kind of skipping some of the required fields. Please let us know if you've got continued questions. I'll take the others offline. So thank you for submitting them, and I'll be in touch.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.